einen schönen guten Morgen to this open forum session. We're going to start with an apology. Apologies if we started a little bit later than planned. The winter has shown its effect, and we weren't all here on time. But thank you very much for you all to be here on time and for this very important session. We were just discussing probably one of the last ones of the World Economic Forum 2023, and as one of the panelists just said, we were saving the best for last. So very happy to see you all. That goes as well for the panelists that I will introduce to you in a second. I was planning to kind of introduce this panel and the topics as well. And the main takeaway and the main questions you already saw in the video. So just to kind of wrap it up very quickly, what we were going to talk about. The impact of climate change is a topic that has been discussed very heavily, also on this stage, on the open forum stage, but also during the regular sessions at the WEF. It is a topic of importance to us all, but we're going to talk about a topic within that topic which is probably not as known as it should be. So we're very happy to discuss this today. With the impact of climate change that is felt around the globe, it sheds a light on people that are affected by climate change, as we all are, but who face different challenges within that topic. We're talking about persons with disabilities. An estimated 15% of the global population have disabilities, and they're particularly affected by the problem of climate change, as we will hear on this panel, how they are affected. And, you know, they're amongst the most vulnerable, and it needs to be addressed, these issues and these questions, and we're going to try and maybe find some answers and find some solutions in that topic, because people with disabilities are still marginalized in a lot of discussions, and they should be heard also when it goes, or when it comes to climate change, climate debates, and action against the climate change. Let me introduce to you the panelists of this session, and if you don't mind, I'll just start on my left and then going all the way to the end. Right on my left, we have Ashleigh Streeter-Jones here. Welcome. She's a community champion from the Melbourne hub, so from the extreme heat of Australia to the extreme cold of Switzerland. I hope you adapted well. Very welcome to you, Ashleigh. Then we have Her Excellency Hessa Bint Eisa Buhumaid. I hope I pronounced that almost correctly. She's the Minister of Community Development, Ministry of Culture, Youth and Community Development of the United Arab Emirates, based in Dubai.
Correct.
Yes. Then we have Fawn Sharp. Welcome to you as well. She's the President of the National Congress of American Indians. And last but not least, a fellow Swiss, we have Christoph Keller. He's an author, novelist, editor, based in St. Gallen. Welcome to all of you. Christoph Keller, I just shared with you, and you probably agree as well. Whenever I talked to people about this session, about the topic of this session, I often got the answer, strange. People with disabilities and climate change, what's the link there? And I think it would be helpful for all of us and people listening and watching us. Can you give us maybe just a quick introduction? What exactly is the link between these two things?
Well, I think I kind of want to go in strong and say that disability always comes last. So whatever we talk about, we usually don't talk about people with disabilities. We are kind of a minority's minority, you know, so kind of, even though we're kind of the largest disability, we are not as much talked about, you know. You see that in, well, I was about to say on Swiss TV, you know, when you have a round of people there there's usually nobody with a disability unless it's a disability, the special disability show, you know. So, but I mean, the link to climate change, I mean, climate change is also about climate catastrophes, not just change.
Yeah.
Change we can adapt to in a much slower way, but it's about catastrophes. It's about a flood. It's about monsoon. It's about earthquakes. It's about fires and all that. And then life becomes horrible for everybody. But for people with special needs, it's even more life-threatening. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we saw that during the pandemic. In Switzerland, nobody talked about people with disabilities. You know, it took the country like 3 months till an article appeared in the newspaper, and that was by me, pointing it out. Mm-hmm. What happened to people with disabilities in, during the pandemic, also triage, hospital, etc. Yeah. Next thing was energy crisis. You know, I read interview after interview when they say, well, you know, not to worry, but I have my stack of candles too if something happens, and 2-page interviews, nothing what happens with people with disabilities.
It's incredible. We forget the most vulnerable.
Yeah. The other day there was an article in another local newspaper, a full page about what if it gets nuclear, and we have shelters. You know, not a word about how we get in when you're in a wheelchair, and I thought kind of the cutest thing was that, okay, and in our shelters we have even in an emergency exit, all you have to do is climb up that ladder, you know.
So we speak about accessibility, we speak about health, about livelihood. Those are the topics that are on the forefront in that discussion. I was just thinking when you talked about extreme weather conditions, Minister, I think you just experienced that in your country.
Indeed.
Can you give us an idea of how you reacted, and maybe also with the link of how did you react for the people who were actually in need of your help as well?
Absolutely. Well, if you may allow me, I'd like to start by just introducing the concept of people with determination, which is the concept back at home in the United Arab Emirates is referred to people with different abilities, not even people with disabilities. So we believe that each and every one of us has a different ability. Isn't that true? So this brings me back, and specifically in 2016, when a national program have been launched for people of determination. And starting from that day, we only use this terminology back in the United Arab Emirates. And it have been announced in collaboration and in design with people with different abilities themselves, their parents, their caregivers, the society that supports them as well. So going back to the question you were asking, and specifically when it's a natural disaster, really unusual thing have happened this year in July. We in the United Arab Emirates don't usually have a lot of rainfalls. That's common where we come from. So that's in the winter months. What about summer rain? It's even more weird to have any rain during summer. But this happened during this specific summer in July, where we started having some clouds and then some drizzle here and there, and we were excited. That would make the climate and the weather a little bit cooler. But then, and specifically at 10:30 p.m. on the 25th of July, where those showers started non-stop until 9 a.m. on the 27th. So that's 2 full days. So that's a little bit unusual. And an emergency have happened because those rainfalls we have not experienced in the last 27 years, which is an alarming thing. It shows us that natural disaster can happen, climate change can have an impact, and once that have happened, luckily we were able to refer within 4 hours to a protocol that luckily during the pandemic, we have worked closely with our national agency for emergencies, specifically related to people of determination, people with different abilities during emergencies. We were able to go back to that protocol, quickly get it on board and implement it. So within 4 hours, people with different abilities, our seniors, our specific categories in the society who required faster and quicker help were able to actually get that help and that assistance. So in terms of evacuation, in terms of free shuffling and finding new houses and shelters for them, it was a tough time, but we were lucky to have such a document ready for an unnecessary and unseen example that happened specifically this July in the Emirates of Fujairah, which is an emirate, which is a beautiful city with beautiful mountains, but it happened to have the luck of receiving rain and those floods.
Were you just lucky, or was it foresight? Was it really something that you saw now that, oh, this is a topic, this is a policy, this is a protocol that we specifically did for cases like this? I mean, that's a policy.
Honestly,
issue as well.
it is actually a government policy that was put in place, but luckily it was put in place before this catastrophe happened.
Yeah.
And it was put in place during specifically the pandemic. Never did we thought that we thought we will refer to this document when another pandemic will happen or something, just in case something happens. But that case happened. And it happened to be a natural disaster with those floods, non-stop floods.
It's a very good example, of course, and one that is very positive. Could you imagine, Fawn, that this is that it's probably not the case everywhere? We know it's not the case everywhere. Where do you see the biggest challenges, the biggest problems in, exactly doing what the Emirates were doing, acting quickly?
Yes, thank you. Before I answer the question, I just want to take a moment to really thank everyone for coming today. It's been an incredibly busy week, and I was really looking forward to the opportunity to directly engage with the public at large. I just express some gratitude. It's been a very beautiful place to visit, and so I'm just so honored and happy to be here to engage directly with the public. So thank you, Siakwil. I could definitely relate. Indigenous peoples all across the planet are disproportionately impacted by climate change. And oftentimes in some of our remote villages and locations, including my own village of Tahola, located on the western side of the United States, we're very vulnerable to things like sea level rise and extreme weather events and storms. And we had one event where when I served as president of my tribe, it was about 10, 11 o'clock at night, I received a phone call from a tribal elder that the ocean had breached and was took out some of the outdoor structures in his backyard. And so we lost power. I had to declare a national state of emergency. And then the ocean intruded into our village and started flooding at night. And then we had some extreme wind events that took out some of our large trees. And so for 8 days, we were without power, we were without water, and for the average citizen, that was a challenge. But I also came to find out those that were disabled, our elderly and others that needed dialysis machines, that needed heat, that needed, I was just impressed with how our community rallied together through a system, a network of volunteerism. And so I think it's critically important to understand those areas and those communities that are vulnerable to climate change, that is part of not only your response strategy, but certainly in your recovery strategy after the impacts of climate events happen, that you're not only able to respond and be there for the most vulnerable, but as everybody is trying to recover to get back to normal, that there's extra attention and emphasis, because we just found that government wasn't prepared to do that, but our citizens were. Our citizens are not going to just let family and relatives suffer in their vulnerability against the impacts of climate change. But that taught us a lesson. That taught us that we do need to include how we're going to respond not only to the actual impacts, but in the recovery. And then certainly in the days following a climate event, there's also a need to ensure that the most vulnerable are paid attention to with intention.
That's a goal for oh, yes, Chris.
Well, if I may, I mean, this strangely reminded me of a situation we had a few years ago in New York City during Hurricane Sandy, when all the lights went out. Well, in the lower part of Manhattan, all the lights went out. But we kind of had much less of the community going on there. Because all people, I mean, we were living in a gigantic house on the 20th floor, which is maybe not so intelligent when you're in a wheelchair, but hey, it has a good view. And 80% of the building kind of evacuated. They went to their other homes, they went to friends, etc., but we couldn't. And then after a while, a little bit of a community sense did also kick in. But we felt abandoned. Yes. We felt abandoned. So just wanted to add that.
Ashleigh, those examples show how important it would be to have a policy and to have something prepared. You're quite the expert in that field. You're of course still young, but you've worked you've worked with these questions. How do you see the topic that we discussed today? How far are we, and what needs to be done?
Thank you for this question. And as we were talking before we came on stage, it occurred to me that I don't usually introduce myself in this way, but I am going to reintroduce myself. My name is Ashleigh Streeter-Jones. I'm 28 years old, and for over half of my life, I have lived with a disability. My expertise, or I should say my passion area, is getting more diverse representation in politics and policy. I fundamentally believe in this principle of no decisions about us without us. And I think at the crux of it is we can't incorporate people's perspectives if we don't hear from them. And actually we need to move past a space of consultation where we're just talking to people, going away, doing the work, but actually co-designing, bringing people in from the first, from the starting point. And I think as an example, or even if I reflect on my own experience, many years ago I worked somewhere that was a multi-storey building, and I was one of the fire wardens, and we were given the instructions that if something happens which means the building must be evacuated, then we need to leave the people who might require a wheelchair or extra accessibility. If they're not on the ground floor, we have to leave them for the fire department. We couldn't actually evacuate those people because we didn't have the facilities. Now, this is a classic example of a barrier which really could have been pre-identified and pre-mitigated. But if we're only thinking of this when we get to the end of the policy, or when we've written the policy and then we've gone out to communities to start consulting it, and we've got this feedback, but actually we're too far along the process, we recreate and we entrench those barriers in our policies, in our legislation, in our broader society. And that's true not just from a government or a political perspective, but for any perspective. And obviously building accessibility is one way to do that, but there are so many examples. So I think at the crux of that has to be respect, has to be a recognition that people with disability, disabled people, are experts in their own lived experience, and actually we should never be on the periphery. We should be a primary consideration along with every other population group.
It's a very important point, and as you say, diversity. The first step is acknowledge that there are other people and there are other ways of dealing with these issues, and that's the huge topic of being heard and being seen. How can we promote that? Christoph Keller, but also openly. How can we be heard and seen?
If I may. Well, how can we be heard? I mean, doing something like this, raise our visibility. But
awareness
I think
as well.
Ashleigh said the key word, and that's representation.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, in Switzerland, there's a massive glass ceiling that hangs over our heads. I mean, over the heads of people with disabilities. I mean, there's a lot going on in this country. There's from insurance to whatever, but what we don't have is representation. And that is true for almost every level. I mean, in politics, in businesses, CEOs with a disability, congressmen with disabilities. And I truly believe, in my experience, all talk with these people, politicians, etc., as long as we don't have a seat, we are not being heard and nothing will happen. And also, I picked up a wonderful line at one of the workshops here, and there was a wonderful woman who said, and I want to say that for us too, I said, I don't want a seat at your table. I want a new table.
Madam Minister, people living with disabilities, they're often not, first of all, not seen, but then not involved in these questions. And that was an incredible example. For example, when we come to infrastructure or when we come to building, how do you tackle these challenges as as someone who's in charge of these questions?
Well, I can't stress enough how important it is to ensure that at the level of policy making, that the specific target market need to be involved. And let me give an example of, we wanted to design and to have a UAE universal code design to ensure that all our buildings, gardens, public parks, cinemas, you name it, are all accessible. And not only for people with different abilities, but for any other ability, for a pregnant woman, for an elderly, for anything. Specifically, it was made for people with different abilities. So such a policy, we could have taken the shortcut and went and consulted with the biggest consultancy firm in the world and get it done and approved by cabinet and implemented. But this will not work, because you need to understand that whatever we are designing and we are launching as big as this 300 document pages is actually impactful at the end of the day. And this will only happen if people with different ability had access to each and every single page of that document and approve it. We needed to put ourselves in their shoes, not only through empathy, but through real life example. That's what happened with the UAE Universal Code, which luckily we have had it launched within the last 2 years, and now we are gradually implementing it because it can be very costly to implement such a code. Going back to ensuring that people of determination are at the heart of any policy making, there's something that we changed when approving any national policy through cabinet. We had to have the voice of this specific target market approved, literally approved. And that's through the specific council we have, which is basically a consultancy council representing people of determination themselves with the different abilities. We have a catalog of around 11 specific approved different abilities in the UAE. And then we have their parents/caregivers, and then the local communities around them, whether represented by an NGO or a civil servant representation. When we have the approval of all these, then will cabinet look at this document and approve it as a policy. It is that important. It have helped to ensure that whatever we are launching as a government has the highest buy-in, and not only that, but the highest impact as well when implemented.
So top-down doesn't really work in that
Not really.
case.
You have to have people on the same table. You create this table, as he mentioned,
Or a different table,
or a
whatever
different
you
table,
Anyway, table.
design a new table, and then ensure that everyone is on board.
Still on the topic of being heard, and that's where I want to make the link again to to the climate issue and to the issue of protecting the earth. Fawn, I read something incredible. Indigenous communities represent 5% of humanity, but they protect 80% of Earth's biodiversity, which shows that it would be even more important to be heard and to listen to these communities. How can we assure that? How can we do that?
Yes, excellent question. And you're absolutely right. When you look at disproportionality, you have to, with intention, ensure of inclusivity. And so I think Ashleigh said something that was very key, and that is to not wait until a disaster, but be thinking ahead of time. And the world is preparing. The world is preparing adaptation strategies, mitigation strategies, and all these different trying to think ahead. I mean, there's so much about the climate crisis that we don't know. We don't know how it's going to continue to intensify. But the few things that we do know, we have to be aggressive, and we have to be intentional, and we have to be strategic. And so I think representation, absolutely. We need to ensure that at every level, whether it's representation in a government decision-making seat, or a committee, or a commission, or a board, or a community, at every level, from grassroots on up to decision-making, because there's multiple spheres of influence in public policy. And so I think we need to, with intention, look at representation when it comes to appointing and putting together working groups. I think the other thing that was mentioned is ensuring that once you do consult, that it's meaningful consultation. You don't just sit down, turn on a tape recorder. Well, actually, do we have tape recorders anymore? I don't know. Start recording and then walk away and do the work.
Yeah.
I think when we do create space to hear the most vulnerable and to be strategic and inclusive, it's important to take that body of work and that input and ensure that that drives public policy decision making, and it doesn't just fall on deaf ears. And I mean, it has to. We have to utilize that information because it's so incredibly informative and powerful. I think there's also another opportunity in that there's new and emerging technology. There are things like building with cross-laminate timber, where you can design buildings where they aren't 90-degree angle construction. You could actually create through computer-assisted design, different ways of designing buildings that are new and emerging and unique. And when we look at new technologies like that, I think it's also important to be intentional and not to think of it as an afterthought. So I think there's just a world of opportunity as we face the climate crisis and as we are transitioning into a new economy and new innovation to really be intentional about all of these decisions.
When we talk about representation and inclusion, we know that sometimes takes time. Do we need a quota, Mr. Keller, for people with disabilities to be on the table? Would you promote such an idea?
I'm not sure whether I more like believe in the more normal process. That we fight for that we find people who are willing and able to go into the business of politics. And I'm doing that with, there's a severely disabled man in Zurich. His name is Islam Alijai, and he's now running for Congress, for Nationalrat, for the second time. And he has CP, cerebral paralysis, and that comes also with an incredible speech impediment. So I mean, this guy is a superhero on two levels. And I contribute to the big essay and an interview to his, well, let's say in American style, campaign book. And I hope that book will have a certain success, make disability more visible, and hopefully make him our next congressman who has a severe disability, but who's not there because of the disability, but because of all the great themes and goals he has, including making disability more, let's say, more heard. And I hope that will lead to other people doing that. It doesn't have to be only Nationalrat, but also on all other levels. You know, I think that I'd rather go that way. And since I have the opportunity here, I mean, please, everybody move to Zurich and vote for him.
Vote for him. I think you give us a good point. Inclusion goes together with good examples and with people we see and people we hear. How important is that actually? That we can see people who are doing what they're doing and who give us an idea of how it is to be heard.
Role modelling is incredibly important, and something I'd like to add to this wonderful discussion we've been having about voice. I have been in activist and advocacy spaces for 10 years, and one of the phrases which sets off my alarm bells is, "I'm a voice for the voiceless." And the reason for that is because everybody has a voice. The issue isn't necessarily an absence of voice, it's an absence of listening. So again, going back to the principles of meaningful consultation and meaningful inclusion and actually recognition and valuing of expertise, and not going out to disabled people and constantly asking them to provide that expertise and that lived experience for free. Disabled people are also more likely to live on or under the poverty line, and it's critical that we compensate people for the value that they're adding. So I'd like to throw that out there as well. In terms of being able to see this being role modelled, it's exceptionally important. Time and time again, we hear the importance of role modelling, and actually in Australia, we have a senator, Senator Jordan Steele-John, who was elected a number of years ago, and he is a young man. He's same age as me, I think 28. He's in a wheelchair, and he is a member of the Greens Party. He's a senator for Western Australia. So he has come in as a young, visibly disabled man advocating for climate action. And whether or not you agree with political allegiances or political leanings, it is incredibly important that we have these perspectives brought in. And when he got into Parliament, we suddenly realised, surprise, surprise, not very wheelchair accessible. It's to that, and I think he was elected, feel welcome to fact check this, it was either, I think it was 2019. So we're not talking
recently,
very recently. And I think, if nothing else, his election was so important to hold this mirror up to our highest decision-making structures in the country, because we designed them in a way that says to people like Senator Steele-John, this place was not designed for you to be here.
I mean, that mirror is so important. That
it is.
We see it, and I mean, he became a voice. And if I think about the opposite of the voiceless, are the ones with a voice, also the ones with a power. Madam Minister, you are one of those decision makers, and the ones with the power. What responsibility do you see personally for making the voiceless heard?
Well, it's a huge responsibility. When you're giving an opportunity to change, you need to utilize it, and you need to utilize it fast. We are in a very fast-moving world where things that need to be done today, if it's done early in the morning, is better than done late at night, for example. Very important topic as well I would want to add, which is not taking in consideration only the needs of people of determination themselves, but also we really as a world need to consider people living with people of determination and people with different abilities. Usually this segment, whether they're families, whether they are caregivers, whether they are teachers at schools, whether they are people who help in rehabilitation centers, are sometimes really not looked at in a really deep way. Because people who support people with different abilities they themselves require an extra mile of care as well. They can be easily burnt out, they can be forgotten, and they might lose interest one day. And now I'm talking about people with disabilities, with different abilities. Some are fortunate to be much more reliable and like, for example, people who are on wheelchair might find it much easier to communicate, but people with other different disabilities might require more people around them. So having a full support system for people of disabilities themselves, but also considering the support system around them. We come from a country where families is a very big, important topic. We continue working on empowering and strengthening family ties. And when a family receives a news of having a child or a spouse or whatever changes, and then you suddenly start having, suddenly start requiring an extra care because of this individual in the family, this individual cannot do it by him or herself. This individual will require the full family support.
They're all affected in a way, yeah.
All effective. This also goes to the community, this goes to the school, to the workplace. So all these need to be considered and taken in consideration. And I believe as a politician that unless we put such requirements in a policy, in a public policy, it will be very difficult to ensure the sustainability of it. So you need to put it there. This policy needs to be engraved as part of your national agenda, or whatever you would want to call it, or a strategy. We have national agendas that is reviewed every 6 months and every 3 months and every 5 months, 5 years. But you need to put it there right in front of everyone so that you can have everyone on board. We can have a lot of interesting campaigns and initiatives here and there, but what really ensures the long life term of such, how can we sustain it unless you have it written in a policy?
Yes, please.
I would like to add something here because I want to launch an idea here that goes very parallel to what you're saying. Maybe a different approach, and what I'm kind of, I have a superhero fantasy. We're talking about climate disasters, from flood to earthquakes to unexpected heavy rains. So I would like a SWAT team for people with disabilities in need during crisis, but also outside of office hours. I also want to point out it shouldn't just be about an earthquake in Switzerland or whatever, but in my experience, what happens or what doesn't happen is if you have a disability, if you have problems yourself, or your wheelchair breaks down, or your hearing aid, or your I don't know, pain medicine runs out, etc., etc. I would like to have a national task force, SWAT team, or the ex-men and women who come flying in and solve your problem. You know, and that should, and I don't think that's such a fantasy to create something like that nationwide, maybe even internationally, who knows. And here at the WEF, I had a test person, and I talked to that person and told him this idea, and he was all excited and said, let's stay in touch and let's do a conference. You know, let's get together and discuss this. And this was the chief of the Swiss Armed Forces. So, okay, we got already somebody on board, and excellent. I would love to hear from everybody here in the room, and the millions and millions who are live streaming us, to approach me or to come up with ideas how we can realize that. And
I mean, you certainly already got an emphatic nod from the minister, so you will be on board.
He's talking, and I'm thinking, how, if you may allow me, I'm thinking there where we need to use the power of technology to ensure that we are fast in responding to such need. if we don't have the right information about the right people, and when I say the right information, it needs to be very detailed with the specific need of this person, so that we can respond very quickly. And when I say quickly, what is quick to us? Is it an hour? Is it half an hour? Is it a week? But the power of data and the power of technology that is generally used out there need to be used in such cases. So maybe, if you may allow me, let's add an angle to it by identifying all people of different abilities and all the information about them, so that when we need it and they need it, we can respond, and we cannot use it as an excuse of not being able to reach you or not being able to understand what you need, or we apologize, we ran out of so-and-so aid for you.
Yeah.
Fawn, please.
Yes, really good conversation. It's prompting me to think about that crisis that I had mentioned. We had, it wasn't, well, I guess it was a SWAT team. It was a group within our community that had a post-emergency briefing after everything went down, and they said, look, we need to take full ownership of this. So we had a number of our employees, along with community volunteers, take full ownership of lessons learned from that disaster. And they took street by street and identified and color-coded sources of heat, needs, and how to be responsive. And we took all of that information, and that informed our emergency plans going forward. And then we also knew that we never know when disasters are going to hit. We need to keep it updated. If you go through all that work and you identify street by street, and that we want to make that part of our annual strategy and planning process. So having a SWAT team would be amazing, and it's working in our community on a very small level, but it's working.
And let's call them superheroes. It's a good brand that you could do. So you see, we're already in the stage of the solution-oriented discussion here. Very good. Before we head on with that discussion, I would like to give the audience the opportunity and possibility to ask questions as well. Sorry for getting to you so late, but it was very lively discussion. Yes, I want to open the discussion. Please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Johanna Zuleta, and speaking about solutions, I am 40. When I was 19, I had a car crash and I fractured my back, and I spent a year in wheelchair. And back then it was even more challenging, and that was in Colombia. I understood many things, but one of them, I guess, at the beginning of it, is perhaps the terminology, because for me it's still disability. I wouldn't say that that would be the most advanced or encouraging terminology for the subject. In the UK, where I'm based, we say people with special need or special needs, but to call someone disabled, I still find it very damaging. And back in the day, it was even worse. It was minusvalid, like you're always worth less. So I was wondering, how do you feel in this term, and how can we reapproach the way in which we address it? I love how someone referred as it lay earlier, which was different abilities, not disabilities.
Thank you very much. Before I come to you, I think it's very interesting. I don't know, whether everybody really understood when we talk about people of determination, as you do in the Emirates. I think it was coined in 2017 by Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum, Vice President, and he said, disability is, in fact, the inability to make progress and achievements.
Absolutely.
What do you think about it, Christoph Keller? Would you suggest as well that we should use that phrase or that terminology and not talk about disabilities as we just heard?
Well, I was totally guilty of using the word disabled several times, and you're of course right, special needs, but I do love the term people of determination. But I mean, but also it probably probably needs quite an effort to then also explain what that exactly is. I mean, I'm a writer, so I should be extra careful with words, and yet often I use the wrong terms, but also sometimes that has a little bit of strategy to it. Sometimes the tougher word is also more effective. But I hear you. I hear you. Thank you for your vote.
We had two more questions. That's it. Oh, yes, go ahead, and then Madam.
Thank you very much, and it's really great to have this session, so thank you so much for organizing it. My name is Pascal Bielefeld, and I'm the CEO of AT-Scale, the Global Partnership for Assistive Technology. And I just wanted to maybe add to this conversation, which is something that hasn't really been discussed explicitly here on the panel, is assistive technology. We're here assuming that people who need a wheelchair or a hearing aid and so forth have it. And then the question is, okay, the infrastructure around it and so forth. But the real shocking truth is that in most low and middle income countries, less than 10% of people who need an assistive technology, a wheelchair, prosthetics, hearing aid, eyeglasses, white cane, crutches, less than 10% have access to that. Right? And so I think that's also part of that fundamental conversation. And so I just want to make sure that that becomes also more visible, because people don't think about that. They take it for granted, perhaps. And I really like this idea of the task force, or the SWAT team. And the Global Partnership for Assistive Technology would be very happy to be part of that journey and do what we can to help take that forward with other partners.
Of course, that percentage is shocking. Can you give us an idea how to improve and how to raise that percentage?
Yeah, I mean, it's not that complicated. It's about political will, first of all. Most countries have signed the UN Convention on the rights of persons with disabilities. And in there, for example, there is a commitment to assistive technology. It is a right. Yet most countries, governments, are not living up to that commitment. They're not budgeting for it. They're not planning for it. We have our colleague here from Kenya who maybe can speak to that as well. So there's a question of political will. There's a question of financing, right? Governments are not financing this. They're leaving it to the work of charities. The global community is not looking at this and financing this as well. It needs a spur. Just like 23 years ago here in Davos, Gavi was launched. And that changed the world. And that took somebody like Bill Gates to say, okay, I'm putting $800 million on the table and change the whole dynamic of the markets for vaccines. We need to do the same thing for assistive technology.
Very interesting. Let's hear from Kenya. I think you wanted the microphone as well, and then we'll move over to the gentleman over there. Sorry, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm glad I've heard so much. And this is an eye-opener to the world, because as he says, most governments feel persons who are differently enabled are a burden. And more so, as she said, most people in the world, those with differently enabled capacity, they're like, they have not been seen. There's a lot of stigma even in society to date. So we need first to destigmatize even the mindset of many. And more so, as a person, I feel we need to anchor the whole concept within the systems of governments that are there, because apparently disability is a burden to every other government I've come across, and they feel it's even matters service, rehabilitative services, they are so kind of marginalized. So I'm glad to be here, because AT-Scale has chosen Kenya to be the first country to benefit from the work that they're doing. And I'm here to request that if there's a way that governments can be committed, because I know most countries are members to the GDS and they have commitments they have given, but they're not compliant to that. They're not held responsible for not even achieving their commitments within a given period. So unless we get committed, knowing that disability is a club anyone can join, then we need to get the ground and we root it in the government system so that it is now effective and it's a common it's actually a policy over across board, because you see that we have most governments who have a disaster management team or even a ministry that does that, but they don't do it because the people who need those services, especially evacuation when there's an emergency, no one knows about that. But when you speak out as a person, maybe myself, because I came here as a person, the governments may not understand. What the question here is now, this is our forum. What can we do to governments who are not compliant to the commitments they gave, and yet their population is suffering, and yet they have capacity to do that, but because of the goodwill that they do not have, these people are lacking even in access.
Let me take that question. I mean, do we, before I go to the two gentlemen, do we need more pressure?
Is that to me?
Yes, or
yes.
Open?
Short answer is yes. And I think you've made an excellent point again about the ongoing marginalisation of, now I'm not sure what terminology to use, disabled, people with disability, people who might need this additional support in whatever form that takes. And as long as this group continues to be marginalised, and not just socially marginalised, politically marginalised, it impacts the power of this group. Conversely, there are so many people who are disabled, and sorry, I'm being very conscious now of the terminology that I use, and I have thoughts around that terminology as well, which actually evolved even through the course of that conversation. There are so many people actually that probably do have this power, that have a disability, that may not want to associate themselves with it because of the stigma. So at Australia's last election, for example, I was monitoring disability and seeing if we increased our representation. And if disability isn't obviously visible, like mine isn't, do we also need people to share what can be private and sensitive medical data with us publicly? But we just don't really see people stepping in and doing that advocacy. And I wonder if that would change and if people would feel more comfortable disclosing that if we change that stigma. So yes, I think we need more pressure. And I also wonder who in power already has a disability and who could be that advocate, but who perhaps won't come forward based on the social circumstance around it.
Shall we take those two questions, or Madam? Yes, and we have one in the back. Maybe, he already has the microphone. Very good.
Hi, thank you. Skinder from British Council. I wanted to just share an experience I had around empathy and awareness, and of course language, and the language of art and culture and expression. And I remember taking a dance troupe, Kondoka dance, to South Korea and inviting artists from the city to experience the performance. And they were blown away by this dance performance. And they said to me that we have never seen anything like this in our country before. A group of people with disability performing at this high level, enticing, engaging, sharing their narrative. And a narrative that didn't sit just with that community, but transcended across culture and abilities. And so my question to you is around art and culture and creativity, because it is a space in which we unlock emotion, feeling, and therefore empathy, and therefore action. How and in what way, particularly as politicians, do you embed art and culture, as much as technology, on an equal footing? Because it is the space in which we give light to our relationships, and it's the relationships which we are missing.
Very good point. Let me open it to the.
Well, that's a very good point, and I've noted down right away using arts to increase inclusivity, which is spot on. art and culture can be a very strong mean if used properly to ensure inclusivity. And this comes through a long way of possibilities. There's a lot of areas that art can be used as a mean to ensure that people have a voice and can also be seen through art. And when chosen to be seen, whether representing their different ability or probably presenting a different version of who they would want to, as an artist, as a musician, you name it.
As a writer?
As a writer, absolutely.
We're almost out of time, but I would love to take these 2 questions and comments. We already have the microphone there. Yes, please. And I haven't forgotten you. You will be the last one. Yes.
Thank you very much for this conversation. My name is Karina Radchenko. I'm a PhD researcher from Ukraine. And in our country, the conflict has not just human dimension. Women, men, children are being killed. Their lives are just being stolen. But also environmental one. Because in some cities, in many cities, we have just earth remained. No forest, everything is burned out, and also enormous impacts on flora and fauna. Also, many people became with disabilities. They're injured, like my classmate, for instance, he got wounded in his heart on the battlefield. He continues to live, luckily, but still his life would be different, and he needs support like thousands of men and women from our country. So my question for you is, what is your vision, what is your message to the world to amplify the power of peace for the environment, for inclusivity? Because how can we talk about sustainability and inclusivity when there are bombs and people are dying every day, every single moment? Even right now, it possibly could happen. And also, if we have nuclear weapons in our world, we can stand on the brink of this enormous, irreversible catastrophe that we need to stop together as a unity for the planet. So what is your message to our world in terms of peace and to those people who are now suffering, not only in Ukraine, but also in different parts of our planet,
Thank
not
you very
only
much.
Syria, Yemen, and so on?
Thank you also for reminding us that, you know, we have yet another crisis on the table that goes within that topic as well. I don't know, would you like to?
Sure. Sure, I'll take that question. Thank you. I think it's a very deep and profound question as it relates to both the subject matter and the climate crisis. I think what we witness, this generation is witnessing, whether it's a pandemic or a climate crisis, it's a symptom of a much deeper imbalance. And that imbalance didn't begin in 2020 or even a generation ago. It began centuries ago when we became disconnected from each other and from our spiritual connections, and the foundation that binds all of us together, the foundations of peace, the foundations of respect, the foundations of honor. And so I think you're absolutely right. As we began to reconcile a path back toward healing and our ability to negotiate through these crises from a position of strength as opposed to reacting in weakness and doubt and fear and uncertainty, we as human beings have to look toward each other and toward our spiritual connections to our Creator, to all things living, to come together. And so thank you for the question.
Thank you very much, Fawn. And we'll have the final word, final question, please.
Okay, thank you. My name is Firas Shamsan. I'm from Yemen, but I'm a guest writer of City of Bern. My question, based on my work as a journalist, as well my work as a writer. The issue, like, when you talk about disability, I think it's in the mind of the one who doesn't make the road, the good road for the people who need it. And the one things, before I was working, when I was working in the media, I was noticing one important thing. I'm trying to advocacy. I tried to do a lot of videos and film, and I was not able to add a sign language in my videos, especially now, even if I'm like producing for like internet, it's really hard. Same time, imagine how you describe, you know, like we listen to the TV, we get confused. How you can describe food disabled, someone cannot listen or cannot see what is the pandemic, what is how to understand it, even not just the one, like there is this, you know, like mental issues, how you can describe this. Government, it doesn't take care about that. We made the books, when we are trying to make the books, but we cannot make a Braille copy. The most people who need to learn, the most people who do a lot of success is the one who, they are, it is, I'm ashamed to say disability, but you know, what is happening, the government doesn't give this support. And then it's coming to the disabilities, oh, we don't have enough income. So from here, what can you do with the world leaders to push the government to make fun, just like not one time sign language in the Mind News that they tell about the president where he go back, just more fun as funding, as a fund.
Let me take
and
that.
using AI technology to help more. I think the technology could do a lot of that.
I think we heard the technology would be there.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Let's keep it.
Yes,
So
we have a solution. We can invite the leaders, either speaking here or in our parliament, to spend one day in wheelchair, and all the speakers, or to put yourself in the other shoes.
So everybody would experience how.
No,
Yes.
don't do that. They
No?
end up thinking it's fun. You have to put them in the wheelchair for at least half a year.
Thank you very much. We're almost out of time, but I take
but-
that question also because it would lead me to Christoph Keller as the final statement, because as we heard, the technology would be there, but as we also heard, there are obviously white blind spots still. Christoph Keller, if you had one wish how to address all these questions, and maybe, you know, that you could give us, what would it be? What would it be that you need at the moment and that you would like us to...
I have to repeat myself.
Yeah.
I have my SWAT team.
Okay, good.
That's too.
Okay, yeah.
And can I say one last thing?
Yes.
And I would like to thank the WEF for doing this, for doing a panel like this. And I would also like the WEF to encourage to do a lot more panels like this everywhere, because I would like this place and the Congress Hall swarming with wheels and crutches and everything else.
Thank you very much. Duly noted, I guess. I would love to end this panel with something I read. It's from Bond. It's an organization for international development who wrote about the topic and spoke about the issue that we were talking about during this hour as well. And they wrote, 2023 must be the year that climate action properly includes and meaningfully engages people with disabilities. Everyone should ask, are people with disabilities properly represented and recognized in this space? If the answer is no, then the call for climate justice remains hollow. I think it's a word we should take along with all your words. I think we have heard them. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you very much for your contribution to this discussion. Thank you very much for being here. Danke vielmals, and have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you very much.